Before we get into today's stories, visit dreadsarmy.com to sign up for the Dread Weekly newsletter so you don't miss out on any updates. Also, check out all of the channels in the Dread Network on dreadsarmy.com or in the description below. Thanks for listening. Now let's get to the stories. I'm a park ranger. I've been working at Yellowstone National Park for going on a decade now. I've always loved the wild and having the chance to protect. It is a privilege. I'm especially drawn to caring for the wildlife and maintaining its resources. In the park, we got everything from massive elk herds to the tiniest birds. We have regular campers and first-time visitors, miles and miles of trails, and natural wonders that keep even the grumpiest teenagers in awe. Anyway, this happened on a sunny summer's day. I was doing my usual rounds, checking that the campsites were clean, the trails were clear, and that no one was harassing the wildlife. I like these routines, and I get to spend time in the wild whilst ensuring that everything is as it's supposed to be. It's nice and predictable usually. I also mingle a lot with our rangers and park staff. Ellen, a new recruit who was having a tough time adjusting from city life, was amused and slightly petrified of the regular telltale signs of bears and wolves. We had a laugh about that. Then there was Buddy, an old hand at the park with a somber streak, who'd make weird observations like, "Dang it, nobody respects poison oak anymore." Later, I was back at the ranger station, going over some maps and reports. We had a weird uptick in complaints. People were talking about strange noises at night, scary deep growls, and howling like they've never heard before. We have wolves, sure, but these descriptions were just not fitting the bill. Sounds like a pack of wolves on steroids, if you ask me. Now, most of us just chalked it up to overactive imaginations, or maybe some newcomers getting their first real taste of wilderness sounds at night. But Buddy, he pulled me aside. He's been around longer than anyone else. He's usually quiet, but when he chooses to speak, everyone listens. He gets this real serious look on his face and tells me that he's heard something similar before, back in his early days at the park. "I heard him again last night," he said quietly. He began to explain in hushed tones. "Strange howls and growls I ain't heard in years. Makes the wolves seem like puppies." I was floored. Buddy wasn't the type to joke around, and from the look on his face, it was clear that he was scared. Gave me the chills, to be honest. There was a legend from years back about a creature that resided deep within the park. Most of us knew the tales, but dismissed them as just spooky campfire stories to scare the new guys, or tall talks for the tourists. But now, Buddy was insisting that we consider it, and he was sure it was acting out after years of silence. Maybe it was the serious and fearful tone of his voice, the way he insisted on me considering his words, or the tinge of betrayal in his eyes. But believe me or not, I was left intrigued. Well, it looks like I spoke too soon when I said I hadn't directly encountered the creature. I thought seeing the folks say their piece was going to be the last of it for the day. It wasn't even an hour later, I stumbled upon a strange sight. I was walking along a trail on a routine check, enjoying the peaceful evening. At first, I didn't think much of it. Heard a rustling sound from beyond the trees. Probably a deer or a rabbit, I thought. Then, I noticed that far-off smell like a decomposing animal or something. I chalked it up to the wind carrying scents from elsewhere. I was about to move on when a low, rumbling growl echoed through the forest. Not your typical wolf or bear growl, it was deeper, a lot deeper. Gave me the chills. Must be the overactive imagination Buddy had infected me with earlier. Being the curious man that I am, I decided to have a look, and boy, nothing prepared me for what I saw. There it was, a gigantic hulking figure, standing erect, like a man on two legs, but broader, with a muscular humpback. It was silhouetted against the setting sun, and it had this massive mane, flowing off its shoulders like a cape. From the side, I saw it had the shaggiest dark hair I'd ever seen on a living creature. Looked brown, or possibly black. Hard to tell in that light. Sprouting from the top of its head were pointy ears, and in front, a snout that looked weirdly long for a wolf or bear. My heart was racing. I thought of approaching it, ranger duty and all. But something in me said that was a bad idea. So, I did the next best thing. I retreated slow and quiet, not wanting to attract its attention. After I was at a safe distance, I turned and broke into a jog, then a full-blown sprint. Once I reached the ranger station, I shut the doors tight, told my guys to stay in for the night. No one questioned me. Guess my expression said it all. That encounter, or observation, whatever you might call it, changed everything for me. It felt like I was looking at the park with a new set of eyes, as if peeled back a layer revealing a world I didn't know existed till today. Bet you didn't expect you'd bait this kind of story out of me, huh? Wish I had been making this all up. Would have been easier on my nerves. Well, take care, Donovan. I'll touch base soon. Need some time to digest this encounter. Hey Donovan, I'm a big fan of the show and have been listening for ages now. You always say to email in if we've got a story to share. Well, I've gotten one that's been playing on my mind late at night. Now, I work a 9 to 5 and tend to stay out a few extra hours getting things done. So I'm used to returning home late. This incident took place on a cold January evening. The sky was clear and a thin, waning crescent was the only source of light above. It was one of those nights where you can see your breath every time you exhale. A Tuesday or Wednesday, I think. I live in a semi-rural area in Kentucky, the kind of place where everyone knows your name but still gives you space. Being a mechanic by trade, long days and late nights come with the territory. I'm not too bothered about it most times. But that night, particularly, I was beat. The boss had us working on cars for 12 straight hours, and I was dreaming about my bed the entire drive home. I'd parked my beat-up Chevy in the driveway as usual and sat there for a moment in the still darkness, grateful for the quiet. There's something about the quiet in Kentucky, especially at night. It's almost sacred, like time has paused for a moment and you're the only one left awake in the world. After a few moments of peace, I pulled myself out of the truck and locked it up. The glow from the porch light was a beacon pulling me forward, but the promise of hot food and rest kept my sluggish legs moving towards the house. Mild dread followed as I remember leaving a mountain of dirty dishes in the sink that morning. I silently chastised myself, already predicting the reek of leftover fast food after a full day. As I trudged up the steps and fumbled for my keys, I heard a strange noise. It was a soft click, click, click. Like when two stones tap together. Kind of like that, but eerier. I paused, turned off my music, and concentrated. Sure enough, it was real and not a figment of my exhausted mind. My first guess was the wind tapping some loose branches against each other. But I quickly discarded that idea as I remembered the stillness of the evening. Then I thought it might be some neighbor's dog or some other animal. I was too tired to investigate, so I shrugged it off. I meant to take a step forward but froze when I saw a quick movement in the corner of my eye. My keys slid from my grasp, clattering against the porch steps. Something was moving in the yard. Just as I bent over to pick up my keys, that's when I saw it. God, it was something else. I don't know how to describe it, but I'll try my best. There in the flickering shadows cast by the porch light was a figure. At first, I thought I was looking at a man. A tall man, hunched over and crawling on all fours in an almost eerie fashion. Then I realized this wasn't a guy. It wasn't anything human. Its body was a pale, ghostly white, and it looked like it hadn't eaten in months, looking thin and almost skeletal. When it moved, it was quick. Too quick for a human. It was darting around erratically, making that clicking noise all the while. And as my panicked gaze scanned up, I saw its face. Its eyes were larger than human eyes should be, black and ominous, and there was no nose. An open, gaping mouth looked like a cave in its face, clicking noises coming from it like the casting of dice. Desperately trying to make sense of it all, I stumbled on the porch, dropping my keys again. It seemed to pick up on the sound, and its head spun around faster than anything I'd ever seen. It was then that I saw it was watching me, eyes focused and intense. I would be lying if I said I wasn't terrified. Every instinct was screaming at me to run into the house, but I was frozen on the spot, a deer in the headlights. For what felt like an eternity, I watched it, its black, lifeless eyes watching me right back. Its movements became more agitated, quicker than before. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was ready to pounce, to make me its midnight snack. I don't know what finally broke the spell. Maybe it was just fear winning over curiosity. With a jolt, I turned to unlock the door, my trembling fingers struggling with the keys. With one last panicked look back, I saw the creature had disappeared, leaving behind an empty yard and the fading echo of its strange clicking noise. Throwing myself into the house and slamming the door shut, I took a deep, shaky breath. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it all, but I couldn't. What was that thing, and what did it want? I never found the answer to that. The next day, I approached the yard, half expecting the creature to be there waiting for me. But there was nothing, no trace of it. But every so often, I still hear that clicking noise at night. Sometimes I think I see a flash of pale movement in the shadows. I don't venture out to investigate, though. Some things are better left unexplored. That's my story. If anyone else out there has had a similar experience, I hope this helps them feel less alone. Hey Donovan, in the brief downtime we get during deployment, your show has been a much-needed distraction. You've been asking for listener experiences, and I think I have a story you might find interesting. This happened during my last tour overseas. It's something I've kept very quiet due to the nature of my work. I'm a Marine, presently stationed halfway across the globe from home. The specific location, I can't say, but it's the kind of place where you learn to expect the unexpected. We had been sent in to handle a situation revolving around some dangerous, high-stakes stuff. I won't bore you with the details of our mission, primarily because I can't. All I can tell you is we needed to operate in a remote part of a dangerous territory, far removed from any accommodations or amenities that placate the Western man. I can't embellish the danger and hardships that come with the job. It's all part and parcel of what we sign up for. About 2 weeks into our deployment, we were en route to a new position. We had a convoy of 4 vehicles heading through some seriously onerous terrain. Imagine the worst road trip ever. Part bumpy roller coaster ride, part heated duck and cover drill. As we moved closer to our destination, even the normally jovial guys in the squad went quiet. You could cut the tension with a knife. Now Donovan, you need to know that when you're out there, functionally cut off from the real world, and stuck in the middle of nothing and nowhere, stories start floating around to bide time. Stories of ghostly figures standing watch, of strange voices whispering into radios in languages unheard of pranks that had us pissing our pants in terror. While these stories were entertaining, they were simply ghost stories, and I didn't lend much credence to them. That is, until what happened that night. I was in the 3rd vehicle of our convoy, sitting shotgun next to our driver, Sanchez. He's a stocky guy, always chewing on an unlit cigar, his first form of an inside joke with himself about stereotypes. We were having a frustratingly mundane chat about an Italian pasta recipe his grandmother swore by when something strange happened. The lead vehicle's brake lights flash on and off, halting our ruggedized engines and leaving an unusual stillness. The radio crackled, and the commanding officer from the 1st vehicle ordered everyone to stay put while they scouted ahead. Something wasn't right, and we all felt it. Sanchez let out a low whistle, muttering a string of curses under his breath. This was supposed to be a routine patrol, the proverbial walk in the park, as Sanchez would have quipped. But that was far from what was shaping up. 10 agonizing minutes of silence followed, before our radio choked back to life, an erratic call to regroup, laced with a barely hidden note of panic. Again, details of our job require me to be discreet, but I can tell you, it's rare to hear that note in the voice of another Marine. We began to proceed forward slowly. In the flickering glow of our vehicle's headlights, the road ahead looked wrong, twisted somehow. Navigating past the 1st vehicle, we saw that it was off the road, tilted horribly into a ditch. its remaining cracked headlight casting an ominous glow onto the fractured windshield. I felt a prickle of unease spread over me. The quietness that had descended was so out of place, so unnatural. Something was out there in the inky night, but what? I reached for my service rifle, checking the magazine by habit, my fingers finding cold solace in the familiar texture under them. Then came a low rumbling growl from the tall grass by the road. Something you'd hear from a predator, but much deeper. If fear had a sound, that was it. We braced as something moved, casting a monstrous scaled shadow on the headlight-drenched gravel. And then, all hell broke loose. My skin felt cold, and for the first time, I felt truly isolated and cut off from the world I knew. Then, from the shadows, emerged a figure that looked like it was ripped straight from the covers of science fiction novels. My hand reached instinctively for the dog tag around my neck, perhaps for consolation, assurance, or maybe even divine intervention. The creature standing in the halo of our vehicle's dim headlights was tall, easily 7, maybe even 8 feet. It had a nightmare-inducing stare with piercing yellow eyes, the pupils slit-like and predatory, that seemed to evaluate us with an uncanny, chilling intelligence. Shadows danced over it as it moved. It was muscular, humanoid, but everything about it screamed extraterrestrial predator. Its skin reminded me of a snake, scales shimmering even in the dirt-cast twilight. Splashes of dirt splotched the creature's hide, but from the look of it, no amount of mud could dampen the fear those fierce eyes inspired. It moved with a graceful, predatory caution that seemed at odds with its gargantuan size. A flash of a dark claw swung by its side, the sharp talons catching the light in a menacing gleam. There I sat, clutching my rifle with a white-knuckled grip. Pulling up every bit of guts I've ever gathered, I opened fire. There wasn't time for discussion or for rational thought. Everything was fight or flight, and in our line of work, flight isn't an option. The subsequent seconds were a ringing blur. I remember the deafening sound of gunfire, the chaos of the frightened yells, and then fear turning into disbelief as the creature, unflustered, dodged the bullets. In the blink of an eye, it had disappeared into the wilderness. The aftermath was frantic, a whirlwind of tense faces and nervous chuckles. We found ourselves looking over our shoulders for days after. It was an event that was never spoken of, a secret heavy in the air. Soldiers are trained not to fear the enemy, but what enemy did we face out there? I wish I had answers for you, Donovan. I wish I could tell you that it was just another tall tale from a night out in the field. But every time I run through that memory, I find myself questioning the shadows and listening a little closer for growls in the silent night. The world is so much larger, so much older, and so much more unnerving than we can ever fathom. Hey there, Donovan. I hope you're doing well. Have been a big fan of your show for quite some time now, and thought I'd share an incident that occurred a couple of years back. Still gives me goosebumps whenever I think about it. I'm a police officer and have been on the job for almost a decade. Work in a little town in the heartland of Kentucky. You know, the kind of place where everyone knows each other, where life's unassuming and, for the most part, pretty slow. Sort of like Friday night high school football is the highlight of our week. Night patrols are my thing, always have been. There's a certain serenity blanketed in the darkness, minus the occasional drunk on the roadside or a routine domestic disturbance call. But mostly, it's just me and the road. It started off as just another patrol night in fall, the crisp air nipping at any exposed skin and the moon casting long, lonesome shadows on the otherwise smoothly paved back roads. I remember that day, I was driving down this narrow stretch of road, shadowed by a dense cluster of trees on either side. It was late, probably edging closer to midnight. I had turned off my stereo, deciding to just get lost in the ambient sounds of the night. The hum of the car engine, the rustle of leaves. You know, the usual musings of a quiet patrol night. Had me a few nightly passers-by, foxes and deer, startle in the glare of the headlights, dart back into the woodland edges. Gave me a fair share of a chuckle or two. watching them bound off into the shadows. Just as I'm easing into the comfortable monotony, a crackling noise came over the radio, followed by the dispatcher's voice. Something about checking out a noise complaint up Old Mill Road. It was one of the old-timers who lived nearby. Claimed he heard weird sounds from the woods leading off his backyard. Figuring it was probably a wild animal, I nonetheless obliged and made a quick U-turn, making my way to Old Mill. Once, it had been a bustling place with a grain mill and small shopping plaza, catering to the locals. But nowadays, with the population moving towards the newly developed suburbs, Old Mill was practically abandoned, save for a few old buildings and some homes scattered here and there. I pulled up near the caller's address and stepped out. He was pretty shaken up, pointed out towards the dark woods adjoining his property. His usually boisterous hound dog was now a whimpering mess, refusing to budge from its kennel. After a quick chat with him, I headed down the trodden path. The woods were eerily quiet, only the wind whispering through the leaves and the distant hooting of an owl. I tread forward, unsure about what I was looking for. It's funny when you think about it, Donovan. I've chased down criminals and stood down guns, but nothing really prepares you for the dread of stepping into a desolate, moody woodland late at night. That's when it began. My radio started acting up all of a sudden. Intermittent buzzes of static and whispery voices saying things I couldn't quite make out. Thought it was a signal issue, but it never happened before. As I moved in further, I picked up on something, a peculiar, musky scent, somewhat akin to wet soil after a fresh rainfall. Except there was this undercurrent of rot, kind of like meat gone bad. This was soon followed by what appeared to be strange shadow movements around the trees, growing more frequent with every step. All the while, the wind seemed to whisper things, soft, almost unintelligible. Could have brushed that off as imagination, but the chill I felt wasn't just from the cold. That's when I saw it, or rather, the them. Glowing pair of eyes up in the trees, an owl, I assumed. But then I saw another and another, all separate, all unblinking, watching me. Their colors shifting from red to yellow in the narrow beam of my flashlight. Suddenly, there was a rustle and a large crow flew into the light of my torch from nowhere. The absolute size of it was unsettling. Shaking off the initial shock, I walked on, but the feeling of being watched was undeniable. Stronger even. Every hair on my body was screaming at me to turn back, leave. But cop instincts, they've got you stubborn and sometimes foolhardy. And then it happened. That feeling of something abruptly charging at you, adrenaline coursing through your veins, but your body won't move. Out of the thicket emerged a figure. A coyote, I supposed, from the poor visibility. But that's where things got weird. It stood on its hind legs, its red glare boring into me. Something no coyote can or should do. As the fear balled up in my throat, I fell back, scrambling to defend myself. Just as I raised my gun, it laughed, an eerie, hollow sound that resembled a human cackling, and in a flash, dashed off into the woods. No animal I know could do that, and I've seen a fair share of the wildlife around these parts. Left panting and wide-eyed, it took me a moment to gather myself, but the stench and a pending dread were written all over those woods. Clearing the area soon after, I couldn't shake off the encounter for the rest of my shift. Over the next few days, I thought long and hard about reporting it. I mean, who'd believe me? So I kept it to myself, save for a few close ones. During that time, I researched what it could have been, stumbled upon some unsettling stuff about skinwalkers, and how strikingly similar it was to my incident. Since that night, I don't drive anywhere near Old Mill during my patrols, and whenever I do pass by during the day, there's always this discomfort, like someone, something, watching me from the woods. But at the end of the day, I signed up to protect and serve, to confront fear, and that's what I keep telling myself. Every time fear of that night creeps back in. That's it, Donovan. I hope folks out there listening might have some insight, or maybe, just maybe, someone who shared a similar encounter. Thanks if you end up using this on your show. I'm a park ranger at Biscayne National Park and have been for the better part of 2 decades now. I mostly work the late shift. I started doing it when my kids were little. It was easier for the wife and me to juggle our schedules as parents. And, I won't lie, there's something peaceful about the park at night. A calm that settles over the land like a misty blanket. This particular night was like any other. It was around mid-July, a few years back during one of those heat waves where the day was sweltering. But the night with the breeze coming off the bay, it was bearable, even pleasant. Rounding up the last of my paperwork, I headed out for my usual patrol. I've always found peace in these quiet hours. It's just me, the moon, and the creatures of the night. People think of nature as something beautiful, and sure it is, with its awe-inspiring sunsets and towering trees. But there's a raw, untamed side of it as well. There are mysteries cloaked in the darkness, and secrets whispered through the rustling leaves. This realization didn't scare me. It fascinated me. Pulling on my jacket, I started up the engine of my old Ranger truck, the headlights cutting through the almost solid blackness of the night. The road was familiar, every turn, every bump. Habit guided me through the dense forest that framed the asphalt road. My usual patrol route involved checking the camping sites, the docks, and the picnic areas, ensuring everything was as it should be. But that night, something was different. As I approached the end of the picnic area, the truck's radio crackled into life, and a strange interference filled the cabin. You know, the kind you hear when you're trying to tune a radio station, but you just can't get a lock. Just white noise and static. Thinking it was a technical glitch, I smacked the side of the piece, but it continued its crackling. As the static filled the air, my eyes were drawn to the right where the picnic tables were, and that's when I noticed a figure in the distance, barely visible. It was awkwardly silent. Despite the noise from my truck radio, the silence of the forest was eerie and almost deafening, like the night was holding its breath. Ignoring the continuous static from the radio, I decided to investigate and turned off the engine. The figure was standing near one of the picnic tables, but too far for me to make out the details. I grabbed a flashlight, and with a deep breath, I slowly climbed out of the safety of my vehicle. My boots crunched on the gravel beneath as I ventured into the night, the harsh beam of the handheld light slicing open the darkness. I had a job to do, and that's protecting this park and everyone and everything in it. So I swallowed my hesitation, reminding myself of the duty that came with my badge. My heart pounded in my chest as the flashlight illuminated the area, revealing the mysterious figure more clearly. I figured it was someone trespassing after hours. We got that sometimes, and you never know if you are going to run into one of the crazies or not. So yeah, I was nervous, but I didn't expect what happened next. The first thing I noticed about the figure was the size. There was no way this was a person. It was massive, towering over me at a height I could only guess was well over 8 feet. The next thing I noticed was the smell, a putrid stench that filled the night air. It was a rancid smell, like old wet leaves mixed with an animal scent I couldn't put a name to. Now I've seen many things during my time as a park ranger, from alligators to black bears, but what I saw standing there was unlike anything I'd ever encountered. Its body was robust and powerful, covered in thick dark brown hair that almost looked reddish in the beam of my flashlight. The face, I don't even know how to describe it. It was some sort of cross between man and ape. It had a heavy jaw, a prominent forehead, and deep-set, almost human eyes that seemed to glow ominously in the light. It had a flat nose with wide nostrils and a chiseled jawline that was covered in what looked like old scars. For a moment, we just stared at each other, me frozen in place. If Sasquatch was indeed real, I was looking right at it. There seemed to be intelligence behind his nearly human eyes that I found unnerving. Suddenly, it let out a bone-rattling yell so loud that it seemed to echo across the entire park. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I felt a shiver of fear ripple down my spine. The creature turned, its colossal frame moving with surprising grace, and disappeared into the darkness. Shaking, I hurried back to my truck, locking the door behind me. I frantically grabbed the radio, informing the authorities about what I had seen. The feeling of unease stayed with me, my pulse still racing, as I drove away from the site with the image of that creature burned into my memory. As I patrolled the rest of the park, my mind raced, trying to come to terms with what had happened. I had heard stories of Bigfoot sightings before, but had always dismissed them as tall tales. But now, having seen something so incredible and terrifying with my own eyes, I wasn't so quick to dismiss them in the future. Ever since that night, my shifts have taken on a new perspective. I drive down that familiar road, my eyes peering out into the shadows, always wondering if the creature is watching for me as closely as I'm watching for it. The calm thread of the park hasn't changed. It's still peaceful, still beautiful, and still completely unpredictable. So, there you have it. My story of the time I had a face-to-face encounter with what I believe to be a Sasquatch. It was a night I will never forget, and one that continues to haunt me to this day. I still patrol the same park, drive the same roads, and experience the same peace I always have, but now, with an added feeling of trepidation and wonder. I suppose this is what makes these late-night patrols worth it. I never know what I'll find in the shadows.